The scorching plasma bolt tore through the outer hull of Hope's beacon like it was made of paper, not reinforced titanium alloy. Dr. Eris Thorne's hands remained steady as the emergency klaxons began to wail, even as the operating theater shuddered violently around her. "Stabilize her vitals," Eris ordered, not looking up from the open chest cavity of the young refugee on her table. "This ship has the best dampeners in the fleet. It's just turbulence." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Hope's beacon, the crown jewel of the United Earth Directorate's humanitarian fleet, didn't experience turbulence. Not in neutral space. Not while flying under the universal white cross that had symbolized medical neutrality for centuries. Another blast rocked the vessel, this one close enough to momentarily cut the auxiliary power. In the 3 seconds of darkness before the backups engaged, Eris heard something that chilled her to the bone. Weapons fire. Not the distant thump of defensive measures, but the chattering of small arms close by. "Dr. Thorne." Nurse Eliza Kwan burst through the doors, her once pristine, white uniform splattered with blood. "We're being boarded. They're killing everyone, even the patients." Eris looked down at the sedated teenager on her table, chest still open, heart still beating beneath her skilled hands. Who's boarding us?" The ship rocked again, and the overhead lights flickered ominously. "Xylosians," Eliza choked out. "Their strike craft are everywhere. Security is overwhelmed. Dr. Palmer tried to negotiate with them in Bay 4, and they vaporized him where he stood." Something tightened in Eris's chest. Palmer had been her mentor during residency, a brilliant trauma surgeon who had volunteered for this mission despite being well past retirement age. "There must be a mistake," she said hollowly. "The Xylosians have never attacked medical vessels before. This is no mistake." The voice came from Dr. Sanjay Mehta, who appeared at the doorway behind Eliza, helping a limping orderly. "I saw their insignia. This is a coordinated attack." Another explosion, closer this time. The patient monitoring systems flashed red as the power fluctuated again. "We need to evacuate," Sanjay urged. "The captain has ordered all medical personnel to the escape pods." Eris's hands hovered over her patient. To leave now would be a death sentence for the girl. To stay might mean death for them all. "Go," she told the others. "Take whoever can be moved. I'll finish here and follow with her." Eliza hesitated. "Eris, there's no time." "I took an oath," Eris snapped, her fingers already moving with renewed purpose. "I'll close her up in 5 minutes. Quick and dirty, but she'll live. Now to go." The team hesitated for just a moment before following her orders, transferring the other patients onto mobile gurneys. As they disappeared through the doors, Eris worked faster than she ever had before, her mind a strange oasis of calm amidst the chaos. Years of practice in war zones had taught her how to compartmentalize, how to shut out everything but the patient beneath her hands. She was placing the final synthetic seal over the incision when the doors to the operating theater exploded inward. 3 Xylosian soldiers entered, their chitinous armor gleaming under the surgical lights. Their faces were hidden behind insectoid helmets, compound visual sensors glowing in eerie amber. They carried plasma rifles that hummed with deadly energy. "Please," Eris raised her blood-covered hands. "This is a civilian patient. A child. We're a medical vessel under international protection." The lead Xylosian tilted its head, almost curiously. Then it raised its weapon and fired. Eris dove across her patient, a futile gesture of protection. The bolt struck her in the shoulder, spinning her away from the table and against the medical cabinets. Through a haze of searing pain, she watched as the Xylosians methodically executed her patient, then moved on without a word. The wound cauterized itself even as it burned through flesh and muscle, a small mercy that prevented her from bleeding out immediately. Fighting against shock and pain, Eris dragged herself into a supply closet as more explosions rocked the ship. Through a small viewport, she watched her operating theater fill with smoke. She pressed her hand against the transparent aluminum, leaving a bloody handprint as tears streamed down her face. The pain in her shoulder was nothing compared to the agony of failure, of watching a patient die under her protection. The ship lurched again, and the gravity generators began to fail. Medical supplies floated around her as Hope's beacon began its death throes. Eris felt consciousness slipping away, darkness creeping in around the edges of her vision. The last thing she remembered was a whispered promise, made to herself, to her dead patient, to all those who had been slaughtered on this ship of mercy. I will. Make them pay. The nightmares always ended the same way. Eris would be back in that operating theater, trying desperately to save not just one patient, but hundreds, all of them crying out for her help as Xylosian soldiers moved methodically through the wards. In the dreams, she would run from bed to bed, her hands covered in blood, never fast enough, never skilled enough to save them all. And then the soldiers would corner her, their alien faces revealing themselves beneath their helmets, mandibles clicking in what almost sounded like laughter. She jerked awake, a scream dying in her throat. The sterile white ceiling of the recovery ward at UED Central Command came into focus. 3 weeks had passed since a UED patrol had found her, barely alive, in a sealed emergency pod that had automatically ejected from Hope's Beacon's wreckage. She was among only 27 survivors out of a crew and patient roster of over 700. Another nightmare? The voice belonged to her attending physician, Dr. Isabel Chun. No, not Chun, Eris corrected herself. Dr. Isabel Rivera. The confusion was a lingering effect of her traumatic brain injury, names and faces sometimes slipping out of alignment in her mind. The same one, Eris confirmed, her voice still rusty from disuse. Her shoulder ached where the Xylosian weapon had torn through it, the tissue healing but the nerves still misfiring, sending phantom pain signals that medication couldn't fully suppress. Dr. Rivera checked the monitors beside Eris's bed. Your neural activity is still showing irregularities during REM sleep. The trauma counselor will be by later today. Eris didn't respond. The trauma counselors meant well, but they couldn't understand. None of them had been there. None of them had watched patients being executed in their beds. There's someone who wants to speak with you, Dr. Rivera added, something in her tone catching Eris's attention. A representative from Strategic Command. I've already given my statement to the inquiry board, Eris said flatly. 3 times. This is different. Dr. Rivera lowered her voice. This comes from high up, Eris. Very high up. Before she could elaborate, the door to Eris's room slid open. A woman in a crisp UED admiral's uniform entered, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her posture ramrod straight despite her apparent age. Eris recognized her immediately from countless news broadcasts and military ceremonies. Admiral Eva Rostova, Supreme Commander of the UED Strategic Forces. Dr. Thorne, the Admiral said, her voice carrying the faint traces of an Eastern European accent. I'm pleased to see you recovering well. Eris struggled to sit upright, military decorum ingrained during her years of service as a UED medical officer. Admiral Rostova, I wasn't expecting this honor. The Admiral's steel-gray eyes assessed Eris carefully. Your reputation precedes you, Doctor. Not just your surgical skills, but your previous research on neural mapping and brain-computer interfaces. Before you joined the Humanitarian Corps, you were pioneering work that the military found quite interesting. Eris frowned. That was academic research. Theoretical applications for paralysis victims and cognitive enhancement for degenerative conditions. Yes, Rostova nodded. And now we'd like you to continue that research, but with a more focused application. I'm still on medical leave, Eris pointed out. And after I'm cleared, I plan to return to the humanitarian fleet. Admiral Rostova's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. The humanitarian fleet is being redesigned, Doctor. After what happened to Hope's Beacon, the UED has recognized that our previous approach was naive. She activated a small hollow projector she carried, displaying images that made Eris's heart race. The destroyed Hope's Beacon, bodies floating amid the debris, some still in medical uniforms. Then footage of UED colonies, people gathered in massive demonstrations, their faces contorted with rage, holding signs demanding retribution. The attack on your ship has changed everything, Rostova continued. Public sentiment has unified behind a forceful response. The Xylosians violated every principle of interstellar law, and they must be held accountable. Eris felt the familiar anger rise within her, but pushed it down. I'm a doctor, Admiral. I save lives, I don't take them. Rostova deactivated the projector. You're also a survivor, Dr. Thorne. One of the few who can tell us exactly what happened on that ship. One of the few who witnessed Xylosian brutality firsthand. And you're a brilliant neuroscientist who could help us ensure this never happens again. She placed a data card on Eris's bedside table. Project Chimera. Deep black classification. We've established a research facility that's working on something revolutionary. A neural interface system that could change the nature of warfare itself. We need someone with your expertise to help refine it, to make it safe for human operators. What exactly is this project? Eris asked, not reaching for the card. A way to balance the scales, Rostova replied, cryptically. The Xylosians have always held technological advantages in certain areas. This would level the playing field. I took an oath to do no harm, Eris said quietly. Rostova's eyes flashed. And how many died despite that oath, Doctor? How many patients did you fail to protect? This project could save countless lives by ensuring that what happened to Hope's Beacon never happens again. The words struck like physical blows. Eris closed her eyes, seeing again the operating theater, the patients she couldn't save, the casual brutality of the Xylosian soldiers. Review the materials, Admiral Rostova said, her voice softening slightly. You have 3 days to decide. The shuttle will be waiting. She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. Your country needs you, Dr. Thorne. Your species needs you. After she departed, Eris stared at the data card for a long time before finally picking it up. 3 days later, still haunted by nightmares and driven by a mix of duty and vengeance she didn't fully understand, Eris Thorne stepped onto a military shuttle bound for a classified location. She had said yes to Admiral Rostova, yes to Project Chimera, yes to whatever came next. She didn't know it yet, but she had taken the first step toward becoming something more and less than human. The facility was hidden in plain sight, a decommissioned mining operation on Europa, Jupiter's ice-covered moon. From orbit, it appeared abandoned, its massive domes dark except for minimal maintenance lighting. Only when the shuttle passed through sophisticated holographic camouflage did Eris see the truth, a sprawling complex carved into the ice, bristling with defensive systems and communications arrays. Welcome to Chimera Base, said the pilot as they began their descent. Home sweet home for the foreseeable future. The shuttle bay was a hive of activity, with technicians and military personnel moving purposefully among an array of unusual craft. They weren't standard UED vessels. They were smaller, more angular, with a predatory look to their design that made Eris think of raptors poised to strike. As she disembarked, a tall man with close-cropped silver hair approached. His uniform bore the insignia of a UED colonel, though with modifications Eris didn't recognize. Dr. Thorne, he greeted her with a curt nod. Colonel Marcus Vance, Tactical Operations. I'll be overseeing the integration of your work into our combat protocols. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct and evaluating. Eris had the distinct impression she was being measured and found wanting. I'm not sure what Admiral Rostova told you, Eris said, but I'm here as a medical consultant, not a soldier. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Vance's weathered face. We're all soldiers here, Doctor. Some of us just haven't accepted it yet. He gestured for her to follow him. Dr. Lee is waiting to brief you on the technical aspects of the program. They walked through corridors carved from Europa's ice, reinforced with transparent aluminum that revealed the frozen ocean beneath. Occasionally, Eris caught glimpses of massive shapes moving in the darkness below, reminders that even in this sterile, controlled environment, they were not alone. How many people know about this facility? She asked as they passed through yet another security checkpoint. Fewer than 1,000, including all personnel, Vance replied. After what happened to Hope's Beacon, certain elements within UED Command decided a more specialized approach was needed. Specialized how? Vance stopped at a set of heavy doors marked NPI development. Authorized personnel only. He placed his palm on a scanner, then looked directly into a retinal reader. That's what you're here to help us perfect, he said as the doors slid open. The laboratory beyond was state-of-the-art, a gleaming expanse of cutting-edge technology and holographic workstations. At its center stood a slender Asian woman in a lab coat, manipulating a three-dimensional neural scan that floated before her. She turned as they entered, her expression cool and assessing. Dr. Jian Li, Vance introduced her, chief neuroscientist for Project Chimera and the primary architect of the neurophysical interface. Dr. Li nodded slightly. Dr. Thorne, your work on conscious neural mapping algorithms was most impressive. It's a foundation for much of what we've developed here. Which is what, exactly? Eris asked, looking at the complex neural pathways rotating in the holographic display. I was told this was a weapons development program, but this looks like advanced neuroscience. It's both, Dr. Li replied, making a gesture that changed the display to show a schematic of what appeared to be a pilot's helmet, but far more complex than any Eris had seen before. The Neurophysical Interface, or NPI, is a direct brain-to-machine control system that goes beyond anything currently in use. She expanded the image, revealing the intricate web of neural connectors inside the helmet. Current neural interfaces rely on external readings of brain activity, requiring the user to train intensively to generate the correct patterns. The NPI creates a true symbiosis between human and machine. Eris stepped closer to the display, professional curiosity momentarily overriding her reservations. You're talking about invasive neural linkage. That's been theoretical for decades, because of the risk to the user. It was theoretical, Dr. Li corrected, until we made several breakthroughs using data from captured xylogen technology. Their neurobiology is different from ours, but the principles translated remarkably well. And what's the application? Eris asked, though she was beginning to understand. Colonel Vance answered, those craft you saw in the hangar are what we call Furies. Hyper-advanced strike fighters designed to be extensions of their pilots, not just vehicles. With the NPI, a pilot doesn't fly the Fury, they become the Fury. Dr. Li nodded. Reaction time is reduced to the speed of thought. Sensory input from the craft is experienced directly by the pilot's mind. Weapons systems respond as naturally as moving a limb. The result is unprecedented combat efficiency. An unprecedented risk to the pilot's mind, Eris observed, studying the schematics more closely. Neural feedback alone could cause seizures, psychosis, even brain death if the craft is damaged. That's why you're here, Dr. Li said. Your research on neural protective algorithms is exactly what we need to minimize those risks. The system works, but the human cost is higher than acceptable for widespread deployment. Vance's expression darkened. We've lost 3 test pilots already. 1 to physical neural damage, 2 to psychological breakdown. We need these fighters operational within 2 months before the Xylosions realize we're developing a countermeasure to their technological advantage. Eris felt a chill that had nothing to do with Europa's frozen environment. You're asking me to help perfect a system that fundamentally alters human consciousness, essentially turning people into living weapons. And you want it done in 2 months? No, Dr. Thorne. Admiral Rostova's voice came from behind them. She had entered silently during their conversation, her presence immediately drawing everyone to attention. We're asking you to help save humanity from an enemy that slaughters medical personnel and helpless patients. An enemy that must learn the consequence of such actions. She approached the holographic display, studying it with a critical eye. The Furies are our answer to Xylosian aggression. They will be the instrument of justice for Hope's Beacon. Eris met the Admiral's steely gaze. And if I refuse? Then we proceed without your expertise, Rostova said simply, and accept a higher casualty rate among our volunteer pilots, many of whom, like yourself, survive Xylosian attacks on civilian targets. The manipulation was obvious but effective. Eris thought of those pilots, men and women driven by the same nightmares that plagued her, offering themselves as test subjects for an experimental technology that might kill or drive them mad. I want full access to all test data and complete medical authority over the neural aspects of the program, Eris said finally. If I determine a pilot is at risk, they're grounded immediately, regardless of military priorities. Admiral Rostova smiled thinly. Within reason, of course. We are at war, Doctor, whether you've accepted that reality or not. And one more thing, Eris added. I want to undergo the procedure myself. The room fell silent. Vance and Lee exchanged glances, while Rostova's expression became calculating. You're a surgeon, not a fighter pilot, Vance objected. I'm a survivor of Hope's Beacon with extensive knowledge of neural systems and a personal stake in this project's success, Eris countered. Who better to evaluate the system's effects than someone who understands both the technology and its purpose? It's unnecessarily risky, Dr. Lee said. Your expertise is too valuable, too. I don't trust what I can't verify, personally, Eris interrupted. If I'm going to be responsible for other people's minds, I need to know exactly what we're subjecting them to. Admiral Rostova studied Eris for a long moment before nodding. Your commitment is commendable, Dr. Thorne. Very well. Once you've stabilized the system, you'll join the test pilot program. As the Admiral departed, Dr. Lee turned to Eris with an evaluating look. You don't know what you're asking for, she said quietly. The NPI changes. The connection, it's not something you can fully prepare for. I already changed the day I watched my patients being slaughtered, Eris replied. This just makes it official. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of exhaustive work. Eris immersed herself in the NPI technology, reviewing test logs, autopsy reports from the failed trials, and the mountains of data collected from successful connections. She quickly discovered that Dr. Lee, for all her brilliance, had approached the problem from a purely technical perspective, missing the subtle psychological components that could make or break a neural interface. The mind isn't just a collection of neurons and electrical impulses, Eris explained during a late-night session with the research team. It's a self-sustaining narrative, a story we tell ourselves about who we are. The NPI is disrupting that narrative, forcing the brain to incorporate the fury as part of its self-image. So what's your solution? Colonel Vance asked. He had been a constant, skeptical presence during these meetings, but Eris had come to respect his practical insights. We need to work with the mind's natural plasticity, not against it, Eris said, manipulating the holographic model of the interface. I've designed a modified neural mapping sequence that eases the transition, creating a kind of airlock between the pilot's core identity and the expanded consciousness that includes the fury. Dr. Lee studied the modifications with narrowed eyes. This will reduce overall neural throughput by nearly 11% and reduce the risk of psychotic breaks by over 70%, Eris countered. A slightly slower reaction time is worth it if it keeps our pilots sane and alive. The revisions were implemented and the results were immediate. The next 3 test pilots successfully integrated with their Furies without the severe side effects that had plagued earlier attempts. Recovery times decreased, and the pilots reported better differentiation between their experiences in and out of the interface. But there were still issues. Phantom pain when the Fury took damage. Disorientation when disconnecting after long sessions. And most concerningly, persistent changes in personality and perception even when not connected. They're dreaming about being their ships, Eris reported to Admiral Rostova during their weekly briefing. Even separated from the NPI, their minds are processing the experience, integrating it into their self-concept. Is it affecting their combat readiness? The Admiral asked, ever focused on operational concerns. No. If anything, they're becoming more effective with each session. But I'm concerned about long-term psychological effects. We're creating a new category of consciousness here, Admiral. These pilots aren't fully human anymore, not in the way we traditionally define it. Rostova dismissed the concern with a wave. Humanity has always adapted to its technologies, Doctor. From the first stone tools to modern prosthetics, We incorporate our creations into our self-image. This is simply the next evolution. There's a difference between using tools and merging with them at a neural level, Eris insisted. A philosophical distinction that matters less than our tactical reality, Rostova replied coldly. The first Fury Squadron is nearly combat-ready, and intelligence reports indicate increased Xylosian activity at their forward bases. Time is running out for academic concerns. She fixed Eris with a penetrating stare. Are you still committed to joining the pilot program? The first strike mission is scheduled in 3 weeks. We need every qualified pilot. Eris hesitated only briefly. Yes, I've already begun the preliminary neural mapping. I should be ready for full integration within 10 days. What she didn't tell the Admiral was that she had been experiencing vivid dreams. Dreams of flying through space, feeling the cold vacuum against skin she didn't have, sensing radiation and gravitational fields as if they were sounds or smells. Her mind was preparing itself for the interface, even before the physical connection was made. Good, Rostova nodded. The Xylosians will learn that attacking a hospital ship was the worst mistake they could have made. The Furies will deliver our response, and you'll be part of that historical moment, Dr. Thorne. Later that night, alone in her quarters, Eris stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her seemed like a stranger, leaner, harder, eyes carrying a focus that bordered on obsession. Her once gentle surgeon's hands now moved with a predator's precision. "What are you becoming?" she whispered to her reflection. But deep inside, she already knew the answer. She was becoming vengeance incarnate, her medical vows slowly being overshadowed by a burning need to make the Xylosians pay for Hope's beacon. And that transformation both terrified and exhilarated her. The day of Eris's first full NPI integration arrived with an atmosphere of tense anticipation throughout the facility. Though the technology had been refined considerably under her guidance, she would be the first medical professional to undergo the procedure and the first pilot whose expertise wasn't primarily in combat operations. She lay on the integration couch, surrounded by medical monitoring equipment and the sleek black helmet that contained the NPI hardware. Dr. Lee stood beside her, making final adjustments to the system settings. "Remember your own advice," Lee said, her usually cool demeanor showing a hint of concern. "Focus on your core identity markers when the interface initializes. Don't chase the expansion too quickly." Eris nodded, her mouth dry with anticipation. "I've studied all the logs. I know what to expect." Lee's expression suggested she doubted that very much. "Experience and understanding are very different things, Dr. Thorne." Colonel Vance entered the laboratory, nodding to both women. "Your Fury is prepped and waiting in Base 7. Standard training parameters for a first integration. No weapons systems active, just basic maneuvering in Europa orbit." "I've run the simulations dozens of times," Eris assured him. "Simulation is to actual integration what a photograph is to a supernova," Vance said bluntly. "Nothing prepares you for the real thing." With that encouraging thought, he stepped back as medical technicians moved in to complete the preparation. The NPI helmet was lowered onto Eris's head, its weight surprising her despite knowing its specifications exactly. Neural gel, cool and tingling, flowed through microscopic channels to create the direct connections between the interface and her brain. "Integration sequence initiating," Dr. Lee announced. "Neural mapping alignment at 98%. Exceptional compatibility, Dr. Thorne." Eris closed her eyes as the first pulses of energy flickered through the interface. She had expected pain, but what came instead was an expanding awareness, as if parts of her mind that had been dormant were suddenly awakening. And then, without warning, she was somewhere else. She was in Bay 7, but not physically present. She could see the bay through multiple sensor systems simultaneously. Visual spectrum, infrared, ultraviolet, radar, LiDAR, all processed instantly and integrated into a unified perception that her human brain somehow managed to comprehend. She was the Fury. She could feel the powerful engines thrumming with potential energy, sense the weaponry systems even though they were inactive, experienced the hardened hull as if it were her own skin. The sensation was overwhelming, disorienting, and yet strangely natural, as if a part of her had always known how to be more than human. Neural integration stable. She heard Dr. Lee's voice, both through her physical ears and directly through the Fury's communication systems. Remarkable adaptation rate. How do you feel, Dr. Thorne? Eris tried to speak and felt both her human vocal cords vibrate and the Fury's communication system activate simultaneously. I feel expanded. It's as if I've been living in a single room my entire life and suddenly discovered an entire mansion around it. Try a simple movement test, Colonel Vance instructed. Lift your craft 1 meter from the docking clamps. Eris thought about rising, and the Fury responded instantly, hovering precisely 1 meter above the bay floor. The sensation was exhilarating. She could feel the gravitational field, sense the minute adjustments of the thrusters, all as naturally as wiggling her fingers. Perfect control on the first attempt, Vance noted, unable to keep the impression from his voice. Let's proceed to the orbital testing phase. The next 3 hours were a revelation. Eris guided her Fury out of Europa's atmosphere and into Jupiter's orbital space, executing maneuvers that would have been impossible for a conventionally piloted craft. She didn't need to think about controls or systems. She simply intended to move in a particular way, and the Fury responded as if it were her own body. When she finally returned to the bay and the NPI connection was severed, the return to her merely human form was jarring. Her body felt heavy, limited, almost claustrophobically confined compared to the freedom she had experienced as the Fury. She struggled to find words as technicians removed the interface helmet. It's beyond description. Dr. Lee studied the neural telemetry with evident satisfaction. Your brain adapted to the interface more completely than any previous subject. The modifications you designed have eliminated nearly all the neural stress markers we were seeing in the earlier trials. Colonel Vance's expression was more guarded. Adaptation is good, but too much attachment to the expanded state can be problematic during disconnection. We've had pilots who couldn't readjust to their human limitations. I understand the risks, Eris said, sitting up despite the dizziness that accompanied the movement. But I also understand why they feel that way. The experience is addictive. Then you comprehend the greatest danger of the NPI, Dr. Lee said quietly. Not physical damage or psychological breakdown, but the temptation to leave humanity behind entirely. Over the next 2 weeks, Eris progressed through the training program at an unprecedented rate. Her medical knowledge gave her insights into the integration process that other pilots lacked, allowing her to push the boundaries of the human-Fury connection while maintaining psychological stability. She joined the elite squadron-designated Fury lead, 20 pilots who would form the spearhead of humanity's first retaliatory strike against the Xylosians. Under Colonel Vance's guidance, they practiced complex combat maneuvers, weapons deployment, and coordinated assault tactics. But something unexpected developed during these training sessions. The NPI pilots began to sense each other's presence during operations, a kind of technologically mediated empathic connection that wasn't part of the system's design. It's like I can feel what they're feeling, Eris explained to Dr. Lee after a particularly intense exercise. Not thoughts exactly, more like emotional states. When Jensen pushed his Fury into that high G turn, I felt his exhilaration. When Takeda's targeting system momentarily malfunctioned, I sensed her frustration. Dr. Lee frowned, reviewing the neural telemetry. There's increased activity in the mirror neuron networks when you're operating in proximity to other NPI pilots. The interfaces must be creating a low-level field effect, linking compatible neural patterns. Is it dangerous? Eris asked. Unknown, Lee admitted, but potentially useful for squadron cohesion. I'll need to monitor it closely. This unexpected development was reported to Admiral Rostova, who immediately saw the tactical advantage. If our pilots can sense each other's states, their coordination will be unmatched. The Xylosians won't know what hit them. The day of the first strike mission arrived faster than Eris had expected. The target was a Xylosian forward operating base on a small moon in the Kuiper Belt, identified by intelligence as the staging point for the attack on Hope's Beacon. 20 Furies, sleek and deadly, waited in the launch bay as Admiral Rostova addressed the pilots for the final briefing. Today, you carry humanity's response to an unconscionable act of barbarity, she told them, her voice hard with controlled rage. The Xylosians believed they could attack a hospital ship without consequences. Today, they learned how wrong they were. She activated a holographic display showing the target installation. Your objectives are clear. Destroy the base's defensive systems, weapons platforms, and command center. Maximize Xylosian casualties among military personnel. This is not merely a strategic strike. It is justice. Eris, already prepped for NPI integration, felt a shiver of anticipation mixed with apprehension. The mission briefing made no mention of possible civilian presence, no distinction between combatants and support personnel. This wasn't a surgical strike. It was wholesale slaughter, precisely the kind of indiscriminate attack that the Xylosians had carried out on Hope's Beacon. But as she looked around at her fellow pilots, she saw no hesitation in their eyes, only the hard gleam of vengeance. Many had lost friends or family in Xylosian attacks. All had volunteered specifically for this mission. Any questions? Admiral Rostova asked. There were none. The mission parameters were clear. The target was designated. Justice would be delivered. As the NPI helmet lowered onto her head and the familiar expansion of consciousness began, Eris wondered briefly what her former self, the dedicated surgeon who had taken an oath to do no harm, would think of what she was about to do. But that version of Eris Thorne had died aboard Hope's Beacon. The woman who emerged into the cold vacuum of space as Fury Lead 7 was something different, something forged in trauma and honed by technology into a perfect instrument of retribution. Fury Squadron, Initiate Jump Sequence. Colonel Vance's voice came through the communal channel as the Furies launched in perfect formation. The experimental FTL drives engaged, and 20 points of light stretched into infinity before disappearing, carrying Earth's Fury toward its target. The Xylosian base appeared exactly as intelligence had described, a sprawling complex built into the surface of a barren, airless moon. Defense turrets dotted its perimeter, and sensor arrays reached toward the stars like skeletal fingers. What intelligence hadn't predicted was the Xylosian response time. Within seconds of the Fury Squadron's arrival, alarm systems activated and defense platforms began, tracking their approach. They've detected us, Fury Lead 3 reported unnecessarily. Eris could feel the pilot's surprise through their strange, shared awareness. Impossible. Colonel Vance's voice came through from command. Our stealth systems should have given us at least 2 minutes before detection. They were waiting for us, Eris realized, sensing patterns in the defensive response that indicated preparation, not reaction. They knew we were coming. There was no time to consider the implications. Plasma bolts streaked toward the Fury Squadron, and 20 minds thought as one, breaking formation with a synchronized precision that no conventional pilots could have matched. The battle was joined. Eris had never experienced combat before, but through the NPI, it felt like an extension of herself. The Fury responded to her thoughts with perfect precision, rolling and diving to avoid enemy fire while her targeting systems locked onto the nearest defense turret. She didn't need to consciously aim. The weapons were simply part of her expanded body now, and firing was as natural as pointing a finger. The first turret exploded in a silent burst of flame that quickly died in the vacuum. Eris felt a surge of savage satisfaction, immediately amplified as she sensed similar emotions from her squadron mates. Their shared consciousness created a feedback loop of exhilaration and rage, each victory feeding the collective bloodlust. Primary defenses at 60% and falling, Colonel Vance reported from command. Press the advantage. The Furies dove toward the Xylosian base like raptors, their coordinated assault overwhelming the defensive systems. Eris found herself executing maneuvers she'd never trained for, drawing on the muscle memory and experience of other pilots through their strange neural connection. A plasma bolt grazed her Fury's left stabilizer, and she felt it as physical pain, not debilitating but sharp and immediate. The damage was minor, but the experience was disorienting. For a moment, her human consciousness reasserted itself, questioning what she was doing, remembering her medical oath. Then she saw the Xylosian insignia on a command bunker, the same insignia she'd seen on the soldiers who had murdered her patient, and hesitation vanished beneath a wave of renewed hatred. Fury Lead 7. You're breaking formation, Colonel Vance warned as Eris accelerated toward the bunker. She didn't respond. Words seemed inadequate, unnecessary. Her targeting systems locked onto the structure, calculating the precise point of maximum damage. She released a cluster of high-yield penetrator munitions, designed to breach hardened defenses before detonating within. The explosions rippled through the bunker, creating a chain reaction that consumed the entire structure. Eris sensed movement on her peripheral scanners. Xylosian personnel fleeing from secondary structures, some in military armor, others in what appeared to be civilian work uniforms. She hesitated, the physician in her recognizing the difference. No survivors. Admiral Rostova's cold command came through the communal channel. This is not a precision strike. This is a message. The other Furies were already firing on the fleeing figures, cutting them down without discrimination. Eris felt their collective determination, their righteous anger. These were the people responsible for Hope's Beacon. These were the monsters who had executed patients in their beds. Weren't they? A strange doubling of perception occurred as Eris targeted a group of fleeing Xylosians. For a fraction of a second, she felt something unexpected through the NPI. Not her own emotions or those of her squadron, but a foreign presence. Fear. Confusion. The mental signature of the Xylosians themselves, somehow bleeding through the neural interface. They were terrified. They didn't understand why they were being attacked with such overwhelming force. Many of them had no knowledge of Hope's Beacon at all. The realization came too late. Eris had already fired, and she watched as her weapons tore through the group, their bodies jerking in the strange, slow-motion way that death in vacuum always appeared. The battle, if such a one-sided slaughter could be called that, lasted less than 15 minutes. When it was over, the Xylosian base was a field of ruins, atmosphere venting from ruptured domes, bodies floating amid debris in the moon's weak gravity. Mission accomplished, Colonel Vance announced, something like awe in his voice. Not a single Fury lost. Return to base for debriefing. As her Fury turned away from the devastation, Eris felt the strange neural echo again. Fainter now, but unmistakable. The dying thoughts of the last few Xylosians, broadcasting confusion and terror into the void. And beneath it, a more coherent sentiment that chilled her to the core. They never expected this level of retaliation for what they considered a legitimate military strike against a vessel they believed was transporting experimental weapons. The jarring disconnect from the NPI upon return to base was worse than anything Eris had experienced in training. The transition from the expanded consciousness of the Fury to the confines of her human body left her dizzy and nauseated, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the psychological whiplash. She had killed, not as a surgeon sometimes must, making the hard choice to sacrifice one life to save another, but with deliberate, vengeful intent. Dozens, perhaps hundreds dead by her actions alone, and she had exulted in it while connected to the Fury. Exceptional performance, Dr. Thorne. Admiral Rostova congratulated her during the debriefing, apparently blind to Eris's inner turmoil. Your targeting precision was remarkable for a first combat mission. Eris nodded mechanically, unable to find words. Around the briefing table, other pilots showed various reactions to their first taste of combat through the NPI. Some were subdued, processing what they had experienced. Others seemed energized, already eager for the next mission. All showed the subtle signs of neural strain that Dr. Lee had warned about: small muscle spasms, occasional disorientation, heightened sensory sensitivity. The Xylosians will understand now that attacking medical vessels carries consequences they cannot bear, Rostova continued, displaying imagery of the destroyed base. This is only the beginning. Intelligence has identified 3 more high-value targets associated with the Hope's Beacon attack. You will strike them in sequence over the coming weeks. Colonel Vance, more attuned to his pilot's conditions, frowned. The squadron needs recovery time, Admiral. The neural feedback from combat operations is more intense than our simulations predicted. They have 48 hours, Rostova replied dismissively. The momentum of this victory cannot be wasted. Later, alone in her quarters, Eris reviewed her mission recordings, trying to reconcile the person she had been with the creature she had become in the heat of battle. The neural echoes she had sensed from the Xylosians haunted her. If they truly believed Hope's Beacon had been carrying weapons. A chime at her door interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Lee entered without waiting for a response, her typically composed expression troubled. Your neural readings during disconnect were concerning, Lee said without preamble. You experienced something anomalous during the mission. Eris hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I felt something through the NPI, a feedback I can't explain, almost like I was sensing the Xylosians themselves. Lee's eyes widened slightly. Impossible. The NPI is calibrated specifically for human neural patterns. Unless the technology we adapted from the Xylosians created an unexpected bridge, Eris suggested. Their neurobiology is different from ours, but similar enough that we could modify their interface designs for human use. What exactly did you perceive? Lee asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her skepticism. Eris chose her words carefully. Emotional states, confusion, terror, and a belief that their attack on Hope's Beacon was justified, that it was carrying something other than medical supplies. Dr. Lee's expression closed immediately. That's absurd. Hope's Beacon, with a hospital ship, registered with all interstellar authorities, clearly marked with medical insignia. I know what I sensed, Eris insisted, and it's consistent with something I've been wondering about since the attack. Why would the Xylosians, who had never targeted civilian or medical vessels before, suddenly change their strategy? What would they gain from such an action, knowing it would unite humanity against them? They're aliens, Dr. Thorne. Their motivations aren't necessarily comprehensible to us. Lee moved toward the door. I recommend you focus on recovering from the neural strain of your first combat mission. These perceptions are likely artifacts of stress and synesthetic feedback from the interface. After Lee departed, Eris returned to the mission recordings, studying them with new eyes. If what she had sensed was true, the implications were staggering. But she needed more evidence before voicing her concerns to Admiral Rostova or Colonel Vance. The next mission came sooner than expected. Intelligence had identified what appeared to be a Xylosian supply depot near the edge of their territory. Less heavily defended than the moon base, but strategically significant. As Eris connected to her fury, the expansion of consciousness felt different. The neural pathways seemed more established, the transition smoother but somehow more complete, as if her mind was becoming more machine than human with each integration. The assault was textbook perfect. The Fury squadron descended on the depot like avenging angels, their coordinated attack overwhelming the minimal defenses before the Xylosians could mount an effective response. But this time, Eris was prepared for the neural echo. As her weapons tore through a Xylosian transport, she focused her expanded consciousness on the alien signatures that flickered at the edges of her perception. What she received was fragmentary but unmistakable. Tactical communications, emotional states, and beneath it all, a growing recognition among the Xylosians about what they were facing. They had a name for the Furies in their language, something that translated roughly as mind hunters or soul devourers, a reference to the unnatural way the human craft moved and responded. And there was something else, a thread of communication about the human weapon transport and justified preemptive strike. References to Hope's Beacon that made no sense if it had been clearly identified as a hospital ship. Fury leads 7. You're breaking formation again. Colonel Vance's voice cut through her concentration. Eris rejoined the attack pattern, but her mind was racing. After the mission, She dove into research, pulling every record she could access about Hope's Beacon's final voyage. Manifests, crew rotations, course adjustments. Most were consistent with a standard humanitarian mission, but there were anomalies. A last-minute course change that took the ship closer to contested space than originally planned. Restricted sections that even the medical director didn't have access to. Unusual power consumption readings that didn't match normal medical equipment. She was still piecing together these fragments when the third mission was announced. The target, a Xylosian research facility believed to be developing new weapons technologies. This time, the Xylosians were ready. As the Fury Squadron emerged from FTL, they encountered a defensive screen that intelligence had somehow missed, a web of automated platforms deploying a new type of energy weapon that interfered with the Fury systems. Evasive maneuvers. Colonel Vance ordered as the first blast struck Fury Lead 3, causing its pilot to scream in neural feedback pain. The squadron scattered, their perfect coordination disrupted by the unexpected resistance. Eris felt her own systems fluctuating as she dodged the energy beams, the NPI connection wavering in and out of full integration. In those moments of disruption, the neural echo she had sensed before suddenly amplified. It wasn't just emotional impressions anymore. It was coherent thought patterns, alien but understandable through the strange translation effect of the NPI. The Xylosians knew about the neural interface. They understood, at least partially, how it worked, and they were specifically targeting the connection between pilot and craft, hoping to disrupt it long enough to destroy the Furies. They've adapted, Eris reported, weaving through the defensive fire. They're targeting the NPI frequencies specifically. Impossible. Dr. Lee's voice came through from command. They couldn't have analyzed and countered the technology this quickly, unless they were familiar with it already. Eris replied, a terrible suspicion forming in her mind. Despite the improved defenses, the Fury Squadron's superior maneuverability eventually prevailed. They destroyed the research facility, but not without cost. 3 Furies were severely damaged, their pilots experiencing neural feedback so intense that 2 suffered seizures upon disconnection. In the aftermath, as medical teams treated the injured pilots, Eris approached Admiral Rostova with her findings. There are inconsistencies in the Hope's Beacon records, she said without preamble. And the Xylosians seem to have technology that interacts with our NPI systems in ways that suggest prior knowledge. Rostova's expression remained impassive. Your point, Dr. Thorne? My point is that the narrative we've been operating under may be incomplete. The Xylosians believe they attacked a weapons transport, not a hospital ship. What if they're lying to themselves to justify an atrocity? Rostova interrupted sharply. The enemy always has a justification, Doctor. It doesn't make their actions any less monstrous. But if Hope's Beacon was carrying experimental technology, perhaps even early NPI prototypes, without the knowledge of its medical staff, that's enough. Rostova's voice was cold as space. You're suffering from neural strain and combat fatigue, Dr. Thorne. I'm ordering you to take 72 hours of mandatory rest before your next integration. She turned away, but Eris caught her arm, a breach of military protocol that drew shocked looks from nearby personnel. If we're retaliating based on incomplete information, if we're escalating a conflict that began with a misunderstanding, we need to know, Eris insisted. What was Hope's Beacon really carrying, Admiral? Rostova's eyes narrowed dangerously. Report to medical for evaluation, Doctor. That's an order. Your connection to the NPI seems to be affecting your judgment. As security officers approached to escort her away, Eris realized she had struck a nerve. There was something about Hope's Beacon that Rostova didn't want examined too closely. During her mandatory rest period, Eris was effectively isolated from Project Chimera's operations. Her security clearance was temporarily downgraded, preventing access to mission data or NPI systems. She was told it was for her own recovery, but the message was clear: stop asking questions. But Eris had one remaining ally. Dr. Jian Li, while loyal to the project, was first and foremost a scientist, and the anomalies in Eris's neural readings had piqued her professional curiosity. Your brain is changing, Lee told her during a supposedly routine medical check. The repeated NPI integrations are creating new neural pathways, particularly in areas associated with empathy and pattern recognition. It's as if your mind is evolving to better interface not just with the Fury, but with other consciousness systems, including Xylosian consciousness. Eris asked quietly. Lee hesitated, then nodded slightly. Theoretically possible. Our adaptation of their interface technology may have created an unexpected bridge. I need to know what was really on Hope's beacon, Eris said. Can you access the classified sections of the manifest? That would violate several security protocols, Lee replied, though her expression suggested she had already considered it. But there may be another way. The next mission has been scheduled, a deep strike into Xylosian territory, targeting what intelligence believes is their military command center. If your perceptions are accurate, you might learn more through direct neural contact with high-level Xylosian military minds. The implication was clear. Lee was giving Eris a chance to find answers, even if it meant bending the rules of her mandatory rest. I'll be cleared for duty by then, Eris said, determination hardening in her voice. Whatever the truth is, I need to know it. 3 days later, the Fury Squadron prepared for their most ambitious mission yet. The target was Station Omega, a massive Xylosian command hub orbiting their homeworld. Intelligence suggested it was coordinating all military operations against Earth forces, including the attack on Hope's beacon. As Eris integrated with her Fury, the connection felt different. The neural pathways had evolved, becoming more efficient, but also more invasive. She wasn't just controlling the craft anymore. She was merging with it in ways that the original NPI designers hadn't anticipated. And she wasn't alone in this evolution. Through the squadron's strange, shared consciousness, she could sense that other pilots were experiencing similar transformations. Their human identities were becoming intertwined with their machine aspects, creating a hybrid consciousness that was neither fully human nor fully artificial. Fury Squadron, prepare for jump sequence. Colonel Vance's voice came through, tinged with tension. This mission was riskier than previous operations, penetrating deeper into Xylosian space than any human forces had gone before. As the FTL drives engaged, Eris focused her evolving consciousness on a single purpose: finding the truth. About Hope's beacon, about the war they were escalating with each mission, about what humanity was becoming through the NPI technology. Station Omega appeared before them, a massive construct of alien geometries orbiting a blue-green world. Immediately, defense systems activated, but the response seemed almost perfunctory, as if the Xylosians had been expecting them. Something's wrong, Eris transmitted as the squadron moved into attack formation. This is too easy. Her expanded senses detected unusual energy signatures throughout the station, power levels fluctuating in patterns that didn't match normal defensive operations. And then she felt it, a massive surge in the neural echo she had experienced before, but amplified 100-fold. The Xylosians were broadcasting directly to the NPI frequency, their alien minds reaching out to touch the human pilots. Images flooded Eris's consciousness. A ship that was unmistakably Hope's beacon, but escorted by stealth military vessels. Xylosian scouts detecting unusual energy signatures from supposedly medical bays. Intercepted communications mentioning Project Genesis and neural weaponry. A Xylosian council debating whether the ship represented an existential threat to their species. And finally, the attack itself, targeted specifically at sections of Hope's beacon that showed anomalous energy readings, not at the clearly marked medical wards. But something had gone wrong. Cascade failures spreading through the ship systems, containment fields collapsing, experimental technology running wild. The Xylosians hadn't intended to massacre medical personnel. They tried to neutralize what they genuinely believed was a weapons platform disguised as a hospital ship. A belief that now seemed horrifyingly plausible. It's a trap, Eris broadcast to the squadron as the realization hit her. They're not trying to defeat us. They're trying to communicate. But her warning came too late. Admiral Rostova, monitoring from command, had recognized the unusual energy patterns and drawn her own conclusions. The Xylosians are attempting some kind of neural attack. Her voice came through, hard as steel. Execute Protocol Omega. Full weapons release, all targets. Protocol Omega. The most extreme option, authorizing the use of experimental quantum warheads that would not just destroy Station Omega, but render the entire orbital zone uninhabitable. Eris watched in horror as other Furies began deploying the Doomsday weapons, their pilots caught in the momentum of vengeance and military discipline. "No," she screamed through the communal channel. "They're showing us the truth." Hope's beacon was carrying experimental neural weapons, early NPI prototypes. They thought they were defending themselves. Her words fell on deaf ears. Through the squadron's shared consciousness, she felt the other pilots' determination, their absolute conviction that they were delivering justice for an unprovoked atrocity. In that moment, Eris made a choice that would define the rest of her existence. Using the enhanced neural connection she had developed, she reached out not to fight the Xylosian broadcast, but to amplify it, channeling the alien perceptions directly to her fellow pilots, forcing them to see what she had seen. The effect was immediate and devastating. Some pilots recoiled in confusion, their attack patterns faltering. Others pushed back, their hatred too deeply ingrained to accept an alternative truth. The perfect coordination of the Fury squadron shattered as individual human minds struggled with the implications of what Eris had shown them. "Fury Lead 7, you are compromised." Admiral Rostova's voice cut through the chaos. "The enemy has infiltrated your neural interface. Disconnect immediately, or you will be considered hostile." But Eris couldn't disconnect. Not now. Not when the truth was finally within reach. Instead, she pushed her Fury to maximum acceleration, not toward Station Omega, but toward the quantum warheads already in flight. "What I'm showing you is real," she broadcast to the squadron. Hope's beacon was carrying secret military technology. The Xylosians intercepted communications about it. They believed they were preventing a first strike against their homeworld. "We've been lied to." Using the enhanced capabilities of her evolved NPI connection, Eris managed to intercept one of the quantum warheads, her Fury systems interfacing with the weapons guidance computers. Two more Furies broke formation to join her, pilots who had glimpsed enough of the Xylosian broadcast to doubt their mission. "Traitors!" Admiral Rostova's voice was incandescent with rage. "Colonel Vance, neutralize the compromised units." The remaining Furies turned their weapons on Eris and the two pilots who had joined her, creating the surreal spectacle of humans fighting humans while the Xylosians watched in confusion. Through it all, the neural broadcast from Station Omega continued, becoming clearer as Eris's mind adapted to receive it. She sensed desperation from the Xylosians, but also a strange hope. They had risked everything on this attempt to communicate, to end a war that had begun with a tragic misunderstanding. Eris and her allies managed to neutralize most of the quantum warheads, but one detonated near the station, causing catastrophic damage. Systems failed, atmosphere vented, and thousands of Xylosian lives winked out in an instant. In the chaos that followed, Eris made another fateful decision. Instead of returning to the Chimera facility, she directed her Fury toward the damaged station, broadcasting a single message on all frequencies. "I am Dr. Eris Thorn of Earth. I was aboard Hope's beacon. I have seen the truth. Let me help you end this war." Her Fury docked with a partially intact section of Station Omega, the NPI maintaining her life support as she stepped into alien territory. Xylosian survivors, injured and disoriented, regarded her with fear and incomprehension. Through her evolved neural connection, she projected images of healing, of medical care, of peace. Slowly, tentatively, the aliens allowed her to approach their wounded. As she worked to save Xylosian lives, her surgeon skills guided by the enhanced perception of the NPI, Eris felt the neural connection deepening, becoming something unprecedented, a true meeting of alien and human minds. The aftermath was chaotic. Earth forces, confused by the fragmentary reports of Eris's defection and the partial failure of the attack on Station Omega, pulled back to regroup. The Xylosians, equally bewildered by the human doctor who had betrayed her own kind to save theirs, treated her with cautious respect. Over the following weeks, as she continued to treat Xylosian wounded and learn their language through the neural connection, Eris pieced together the full truth about Hope's Beacon. The hospital ship had indeed been used as cover for transporting early NPI prototypes. Technology the UED had been developing in secret, partially based on recovered Xylosian artifacts. Admiral Rostova and a small circle within Strategic Command had known the truth all along, using the destruction of Hope's Beacon to rally public support for a war they had already been planning. When Eris managed to establish secure communication with Chimera Base, she found unexpected allies. Dr. Lee, driven by scientific integrity, had continued investigating Eris's claims and found corroborating evidence. Colonel Vance, disturbed by Rostova's increasingly extreme orders, had begun questioning the Admiral's motives. Most surprisingly, several NPI pilots had experienced the same evolving neural connection that Eris had, sensing the truth about Hope's Beacon through their encounters with Xylosian forces. They too had begun to question the war they were fighting. The revelation of Rostova's deception eventually reached the highest levels of UED government, triggering a political crisis. The Admiral was removed from command pending investigation, but the damage had been done. Thousands had died on both sides in a conflict built on lies. In the uneasy ceasefire that followed, Eris found herself in an unprecedented position, a bridge between species, her evolved neural capabilities allowing her to communicate with the Xylosians more effectively than any traditional diplomat could. What happens now? Colonel Vance asked during a secure communication. The grizzled military man looked older, the strain of recent events evident in his face. You can't come home, Thorn. Not after what you've seen, what you've become. I know, Eris replied quietly. The NPI has changed me permanently. I'm not fully human anymore, but I'm not a machine either. I'm something new, and I'm not alone. She explained how the other pilots who had experienced the neural evolution were facing similar transformations. Unable to fully disconnect from their furies, their consciousness expanded beyond normal human parameters, increasingly able to sense and communicate with alien minds. We're becoming something unexpected, she said. Not weapons of war, but bridges between species. The NPI was meant to create perfect pilots, but instead, it's creating perfect translators, beings who can truly understand the other. Dr. Lee's face appeared beside Vance's in the communication. The technology is evolving beyond our original parameters, she confirmed. What you're experiencing was never part of the design, but it may be the most important discovery we've ever made. Over the following months, as tentative peace negotiations began between Earth and the Xylosian Conclave, Eris and the other transformed pilots formed what became known as the Interface Corps, a unique diplomatic force capable of bridging the vast psychological gulf between human and alien minds. The price had been high. Hope's Beacon's destruction remained a tragedy, regardless of what it had secretly carried. The retaliatory strikes had claimed thousands of innocent Xylosian lives, and the pilots themselves had sacrificed their conventional humanity, becoming hybrids of flesh, machine, and expanded consciousness that could never fully return to their former lives. For Eris, the transformation was particularly poignant. She had begun as a healer, become a weapon of vengeance, and finally emerged as something beyond either role. A new kind of consciousness that could understand pain and hatred from multiple perspectives and help guide both species toward reconciliation. On the anniversary of Hope's Beacon's destruction, as Earth and Xylosian representatives signed the first formal peace treaty, Eris stood at a viewport on Station Omega, looking out at the stars. Her body remained human, but her mind extended far beyond its biological limitations, sensing the complex web of emotions from both species as they took the first tentative steps toward coexistence. Was it worth it? Asked a voice beside her. Colonel Vance, now serving as Earth's military liaison to the Xylosian Conclave. All the sacrifice, all the change. Eris considered the question carefully, her expanded consciousness processing multiple layers of meaning. "I'm not sure worth it is the right framework," she finally replied. What happened to Hope's Beacon was a tragedy born of secrecy and fear. What happened afterward was a cycle of vengeance that nearly consumed both our species. And what we, have become is something no one intended or predicted. She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the stars. But here we are, changed, evolving, and maybe, just maybe, finding a better way forward than the cycles of violence that have defined our histories. She placed a hand on the viewport, feeling the cold of space beyond. I still dream of the operating theater sometimes, of the patient I couldn't save, of the Xylosian soldier who showed no mercy. But I also dream in ways no human ever has before, sensing the vast patterns of thought and feeling that connect all conscious beings. And that's enough? Vance asked, skepticism evident in his tone. Eris smiled, an expression that somehow contained both human warmth and something altogether more alien. It's not about being enough. It's about becoming what's needed. The universe is vast, Colonel, and filled with minds we can barely comprehend. Perhaps this is how we learn to navigate it, not through force of arms, but through force of understanding. As she spoke, she sensed the Xylosian dignitaries approaching, their neural patterns now as familiar to her as human emotions. Through the evolved NPI connection, she prepared to facilitate another step in the long journey toward healing the wounds of war. The Furies, once instruments of vengeance, now served as vessels for something far more powerful. The capacity to truly know the other, to bridge the gulf between different forms of consciousness. In that transformation lay humanity's best hope for a future among the stars, not as conquerors or victims, but as one sentient species among many, learning the long, difficult language of peace.